Matt Armstrong paid somewhere around $300,000 for a Bugatti Veyron that insurance companies had already written off as a total loss. And when his team finally opened the engine bay in late 2022, every assumption that had made this project look achievable collapsed within hours. That's the first answer this video delivers. What they found wasn't primarily crash damage. Beneath the surface was a car that had been running on a compromised cooling system for years before it ever hit anything, and correcting that, on top of everything the accident had already destroyed, consumed nearly every dollar of financial margin Armstrong had counted on when he made the purchase. Before this video ends, you'll know what the team found inside that engine, what the honest total cost looks like, and why the question of whether this car is finished doesn't carry a clean yes or no answer. The Bugatti Veyron debuted at the Paris Motor Show in 2005 as the first production car to deliver 1,001 horsepower on public roads in a form that was both street legal and genuinely drivable on a daily basis. Reaching that number wasn't a matter of scaling up a conventional engine design. Bugatti's engineers fused two VR8 units, each already a pair of narrow-angle V4 banks pressed onto a shared block, onto a single crankshaft, creating the W16 layout. 16 cylinders, 4 turbochargers, and a thermal output so extreme that managing it required 10 separate radiators, distributed across the car's entire body. 3 sit ahead of the front axle, and the remaining 7 pull air through ducting channels that look closer to aerospace-grade thermal management than anything associated with road car engineering. At the car's top speed of just over 400 kilometers per hour, the engine, transmission, differential, and hydraulic systems all draw simultaneously from that cooling network, and every single one of those systems runs right at the boundary of what physics will permit. None of it is redundant, and a failure anywhere in that chain doesn't stay local. It propagates through every connected system within seconds. That interdependence is what separates restoring a Veyron from rebuilding any other luxury vehicle in existence. Bugatti's own published estimate for a factory-level W16 rebuild, using certified parts and factory-trained technicians at the Molsheim facility in Alsace, France, starts north of $300,000 and covers the engine alone. Bodywork, transmission suspension, cooling network, and all electrical systems are entirely separate cost categories on top of that figure. Parts exist in quantities so limited that sourcing them independently is close to impossible, and the technical knowledge required to work on a W16 safely sits with a small group of specialists, the majority of them based across Europe. Most crashed Veyrons never run again. Insurers declare them total losses, engines get pulled for museum or private display, and the bodies get crushed. Independent automotive restoration without factory backing is the kind of project that experienced engineers in the supercar space tend to place somewhere between extremely difficult and genuinely not achievable. Armstrong decided to attempt it regardless. His entire reputation in the salvage rebuild space had been built on exactly this category of work. Written off Lamborghinis, heavily damaged Ferraris, exotics that insurance companies had declared total losses, and that he had documented bringing back on camera. Honestly, with every failure and setback included in the footage, his YouTube audience had come to trust over years. A running Veyron in average condition trades between $800,000 and $1.2 million in the current exotic car market. He acquired this one, carrying serious accident damage concentrated around the front end and the chassis areas immediately surrounding the engine, for a fraction of that range. The spread between purchase price and running market value looked like genuine upside on paper. What nobody could calculate in advance was how far the restoration cost would climb before that upside disappeared entirely. Early in the project, the working assumption across the automotive restoration community was that the bodywork would present the greatest obstacle, since Veyron body panels are hand-formed, entirely bespoke to each individual car, and nearly impossible to source outside of the factory supply chain. The mechanical side, most people believed, would be demanding but workable. The engine had survived the accident without visible catastrophic failure, and if the block was intact, a rebuild remained at least theoretically on the table. Armstrong kept his early public framing measured, acknowledged the difficulty openly, and held the stated goal constant. A running car, not a static display piece or a cosmetically restored shell that would never leave a garage under its own power. Then the engine bay opened, and none of those assumptions survived contact with what was inside. What Armstrong's team found went well beyond crash damage. Beneath the surface presentation of the car was documented evidence that this Veyron had been running with compromised systems well before the accident ever happened. The entire cooling network, all 10 radiators and every section of interconnected ducting, showed prior repair work that hadn't been completed to factory specification. Seals and connections had been replaced with materials adequate to keep the car superficially operational, but nowhere near what Bugatti had engineered to handle this specific thermal load. Inside the engine itself, discoloration patterns and heat stress deposits on components that should never have reached those temperatures told a detailed story. This car had been driven hard with a cooling system already in decline, then maintained cosmetically, while the internal damage continued to accumulate beneath the surface. That discovery rewrote the entire project from scratch. The original plan had assumed an engine that might require some intervention, but was fundamentally intact at its core. What the inspection confirmed was an engine that had already been living with thermal stress before the crash added mechanical damage on top of it, which meant every prior estimate of scope, timeline, and cost had to be revised upward, immediately and by a margin nobody had budgeted for. Every specialist Armstrong brought in confirmed the same assessment. The W16 needed serious expert-level intervention, and the budget conversation had just transformed into something far harder to resolve. Armstrong addressed the cost escalation directly and publicly, which has been consistent with how he's operated throughout his career in the automotive restoration space. The running total, combining acquisition price, bodywork and chassis repair, the full cooling system rebuild, parts sourcing across Europe, specialist consultation fees, and the engine-level work the discovery had made unavoidable, moved toward a number that consumed most of the financial margin the original purchase had appeared to create. The gap between what he paid and what a running Veyron is worth on the open market was narrowing, not because the car's value was climbing, but because the restoration cost was rising to meet it from below. Some portions of the work remained within reach of a skilled individual. Body fabrication, suspension work, electrical diagnosis, and cosmetic restoration are all demanding, but they sit within the capabilities of the right person with the right access to parts. The W16 sits in a completely different category. Clearances inside that engine are measured in fractions of a millimeter. Assembly sequences are exact and entirely intolerant of improvisation. Torque specifications and procedures aren't published in any service manual, available outside Bugatti's internal network, because the factory never anticipated a scenario where anyone outside that system would need them. Getting the engine work done required relationships built over years in the exotic car space, connections with European specialists carrying genuine hands-on Veyron experience, and a patience in parts sourcing that most restoration timelines simply cannot sustain. To be precise about what Bugatti factory involvement actually meant in this context, Molsheim didn't assign technicians to the project, and Armstrong didn't access proprietary diagnostic systems through any formal arrangement with the manufacturer. What he had were independent specialists who had worked within or directly adjacent to that factory system. People carrying enough Veyron-specific knowledge to separate a rebuild done correctly from one that fails the moment the engine attempts to fire. The final phase compressed all of the project's accumulated difficulty into one concentrated stretch of work. Getting the car's electronic management systems, which actively control every subsystem in real time, to communicate correctly with a rebuilt and partially new specification powertrain is not something a standard diagnostic scan resolves. It required iterative work sessions, repeated specialist input across multiple visits, and methodical fault tracing that consumed time and money in ways that resist any kind of accurate. Advanced budgeting, a seal that had to achieve perfect integrity before the engine could be fully closed, a cooling connection requiring physical rerouting, an electrical fault traced back to a connector damaged in the original accident, undetected until the entire system was live and under load. None of that is unusual for a restoration operating at this level of complexity, and all of it costs more and takes longer than anyone estimates before the work begins. Based on Armstrong's most recent public updates through 2024, the Veyron has reached the most advanced operational stage it has been at since the day he acquired it. The W16 runs, a car that arrived as a mechanically compromised wreck, carrying years of hidden thermal damage, has been brought back to running condition, and the footage of that engine firing isn't a production trick. It's the documented result of years of sustained work. Hundreds of individual decisions made under pressure, and a total spend that honest accounting places well above what most outside observers assumed at the project's start. The financial margin the original purchase appeared to offer has been largely consumed by the distance between what this car was on arrival and what it needed to become. Whatever Armstrong decides to do with it from here, the numbers point in two directions at once. The restoration costs has compressed the margin that made the acquisition look attractive back in 2022. But a running, rebuilt Veyron with this level of documented provenance, full mechanical history, and public accountability at every stage of the process is genuinely one of a kind. No other example like it exists anywhere in the world, and that carries real weight in a market where no two Veyrons ever sell at the same figure. The Bugatti project has set a new reference point for what independent automotive restoration can actually deliver, and every project Armstrong takes on from this point forward will be measured against what this one required.